If, then, that's our series, Logical Answers to Big Questions. Today is if there's truth, then how do we know what it is? Okay, if there's truth, then how do we know what it is? That's what we're going to look at. We pray that God's Spirit would touch our hearts and would convict us, and then empower us to live in what He teaches us today. That's our prayer, dear Christian friends. Do most of you remember the Y2K scare? I thought about this because anybody that was like 13 years ago, right? Maybe 14 years ago. So anybody like in the 7th grade, maybe. Do you guys remember? Do you remember the Y2K? No, see? Yeah, guys, it's heck getting old, So, but anyway, if you lived 13 or 14 years ago, you remember the Y2 scare, right? It was that because 1999 was going to turn into 2000, the scare was that all the computer systems in the world would kind of go boop, right? Would have a great crash, and that. And right, we're talking world computer systems, right? They'd all go in the bucket, and so then the world economic system would crash with it, and then there would be just mass chaos. There wouldn't be any food in the grocery stores. The electricity grid would crash, and it would just be a holocaust, right? Do you remember that? That was the scare? I was in Denver then. I was pastor in Denver, and I kind of didn't pay any heed to that. But I had a bunch of folks in my church who came to me and said, "Pastor, would you have a class on the Y2K dilemma?" I mean, they were really, really scared. And I said to them, "Well, because they said a Bible study." And I said, "Well, Bible doesn't really talk about Y2K. I mean," and they said, "Just see what he said. Just look into it." And because there was even a Christian radio broadcaster who gave credence to the fact that the earth, the civilization and the earth was going to end on December 21st, 2012. Now, I have to tell you, for me, that was just a non-issue because I really do hold to the Bible as being God's touchstone of truth. And Jesus said in there that nobody knows the day or the hour, right? So when anybody ever says to me, "Hey, the world's coming to an end on January 2nd, 2015, I just kind of laugh and say, "Well, it might come to an end, but it's not going to come to an end that day," right? Anyway, a lot of people, 10 to 12%, were really, really frightened with the, and then when it passed, and by the way, if they had done a little research, the very folks that kind of held up the Mayan calendar stuff, they were starting to fudge on it. Did you notice that? Well, we're not sure about the date, and maybe the real date that it gives, maybe it's already passed. Did you read this stuff in the newspapers? Maybe it's already, so they were already starting to fudge on it. If you just looked a little bit and sought after truth a little bit, it would have set you free there too. I'm not dissing you if you were a little scared around December 21st. It's okay. All right, it's really okay. Because a lot of people were, right? Did you know that some people believe the earth is still flat? They're called the Flat Earth Society. Anybody know that? Yeah, there's really some people. I guess they didn't read the Columbus thing. Where the guys were going to mutiny with Columbus because they thought the earth was flat and they were going to sail off on the end of it, right? And I guess they didn't read that or something, and so they really think the earth is flat. I'm not lying. Apparently, you can have all kinds of truth lined up, and people can shut their eyes and say, "No, I'm not going to believe that the earth is flat. Don't bother me with the facts," right? Some people, and you probably know this, but some people believe that we never landed on the moon. Did you guys know that? Right? Yeah, some people really believe that. Again, don't bother me with the facts. I mean, you can have truth out there, but I can shut my eyes and say, "Hey, I'm not believing that truth." Today we're going to look at that question. Go ahead, David. We're going to answer this question, if there is truth. Last week we looked at if there's good and evil, and we said it's self-evident. The very existence of evil, just to know that there is evil, says that there has to be good, because he wouldn't know evil unless there was good, and it pointed towards the existence of God. Remember that? It was self-evident stuff. I think it's the same thing with truth. I mean, for instance, when someone says there is no truth, what they're actually saying is, one truth I know for sure is that there is no truth. Right? There's no way you can deny truth without affirming truth. It can't be done. Well, I'm not sure whether or not there is truth. Well, one thing I know for sure is that I can't be sure whether or not there's truth. You see what I mean? I mean, logically, you just can't run away from it, that we live in this existence every day we live with the idea of truth. It's part of our very existence. It's self-evident. And this kind of shows that. One truth I know for sure is that there is no truth. You're still saying that there's truth. Today, we want to look at this question, which is really the question we want to look at and spend some time at, if there is truth. And I hope that you're in this. I wasn't trying to be funny with the previous slide. I really think if you think it through, the idea that there is truth is just part of our existence, right? It's self-evident. And so what I'd really like to spend time on, if there is truth, then how do I know what it is? That's what I'd really like to spend time on. If there is truth, then how do I know what it is? I don't know if you guys remember the account of Jesus when he died on the cross, and he was brought before Pontius Pilate. You know who Pontius Pilate was? He was the Roman guy, the Roman governor under whose authority Jesus was put on the cross, right? He's the guy that washed his hands, and he said, I don't have any responsibility, which was really foolish because actually all the responsibility was his. He was the guy in charge. You know, you ever notice somebody like that it's really his responsibility because he's in charge, but he's not going to take charge, so he thinks it's not his. Anyway, that was Pontius Pilate, right? And he washed his hands of it. But he and Jesus, they had this conversation. That must have been a crazy night for Pontius Pilate, because the scribes and Pharisees were all saying, hey, Jesus is claiming to be a king. He's claiming to be a king. And then his wife has this dream, right? This freakish dream. And she sends somebody to Pilate. And she says, hey, you leave this poor guy alone. I had a dream about him, and he's nothing to mess with. I tell you, remember that night? But poor guy, he was getting it from everywhere, right? And so he comes to Jesus, and he's frightened. And he says, are you a king? Now, a lot of us just kind of slip through that account. We say, that's, Pilate's frightened. But, if you think about it, if Jesus would have said no, then he wouldn't have died that night. But instead he says, yes, I am a king, and I have come as a witness to here's the word, to the truth. And Pilate says, what is truth? You ever find yourself in that place? What is truth? I had a man in the very first service this morning, 7:50 is the first service, and before the service started, he gave me a prayer request for the little boy who's being held in a bunker in Alabama, right? And he wanted a prayer request both for him and for the man who's holding him. And he looked at me, and he looked in my eyes, and he was really hurting, and he says, I don't understand how God can allow this to happen. Right? What is he saying at the core? He's saying, man, I'm shaken up here. I'm not sure what truth is. Isn't that what he's saying? I mean, there's always going to be those questions and those mysteries, those things we can't bring it all together, right? And they're going to shake us up, and they're going to put us in a place where Pilate was. And he said, what is truth? You ever find yourself there? Today, Jesus, I think Jesus wants to step into our midst, and he wants to make this statement and support it, so that we can know that even in the midst of those things we can't explain, and those things that shake us up, and those things we have to live through that don't make any sense to us, in the middle of all that, we can still know that there's truth, and that truth stands. Okay, I can't answer every question. I can't answer all the mysteries, and I don't think we were meant to, but I know that Jesus Christ stepped into our world, and this is what he said. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He claimed to be the truth, not a truth, not a truth for a few folks here or there, but the truth, the one and only. And then he said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Kind of like my Y2K people. The truth set them free, huh? Or the December 21st thing with the Mayan calendar, the truth will set you free. Except a much greater freedom, a much more foundational freedom inside of us, how we look at life, how we know what truth is, and what that means for our lives. This is what Jesus would give us today. And I think this text is Jesus stepping into our world, just screaming out to us. By the way, I've said this before, but I always ask the question, why were these words recorded so that I could read them right now? You know, God's got to have a plan with that. I think the reason that this text, Jesus turning water into wine, was recorded was so that Jesus, in one place in many, he could scream out at us that he is the truth. I want to set this up for you, okay? Jesus' ministry has just begun. He's been baptized, and remember the voice of the Father was over him. This is my beloved Son, and the Spirit like a dove was over him. He was baptized. Then he went out to the wilderness, and he was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, right? But and he called his first disciples, but he hasn't done any miracles yet, okay? He hasn't done any miracles yet. And so where he chooses, this is his first miracle, and he chooses to do this first miracle in a very public place. And I think, you notice I have on this slide, leave no doubt. I think that's the point to this. He didn't grab his disciples, or two or three of his disciples, and say, gee, watch what I can do. No, he did his miracles in front of everybody. And he wanted there to be no doubt that he was who he said he was. I mean, they had 6 stone water jars, 20 to 30 gallons. That's like 180 gallons of wine. Woo! Isn't that fun? 180 gallons. The wine had run out at the wedding. They had a lot of guests. He had the servants, notice here, he's spreading out the witnesses. He had the servants fill up these great big things with water, right? 160 up to 160 gallons of water. And then he had the wine tasting guy, right? He didn't have just Joe. He didn't have me, right? I know a glass of wine when I enjoy it, but I couldn't tell one from another half the time. He had the guy that knew what wine was, right? And the guy took it and tasted it and says, "Oh, this is good stuff." He didn't have the guy taste the wine who couldn't tell watered down wine from good stuff. He was leaving no doubt, see, that this was an absolute miracle. That's the way Jesus did miracles. When he healed the guy that was blind, he didn't heal somebody that had gone blind, right? Like somebody who was getting older and they lost eyesight. He didn't do that. I mean, he may have done that somewhere, but not that it's recorded, right? When he healed the guy born blind, when he healed the guy that was blind, he had been born blind. Leave no doubt. See, when he healed the guy that couldn't walk, the guy hadn't been able to walk since birth. Leave no doubt. When he raised Lazarus from the dead, the sister says to him, "Man, that body's been in there so long that by now it's starting to stink." Right? Isn't that what the text says? Leave no doubt. Could he have gotten there earlier? Absolutely. Leave no doubt. There's a film. It's called Remember the Titans. Anybody know that film? Remember the Titans? Good. Boy. Thank you. A couple of services ago, no one knew it. So anyway, Remember the Titans, right? And it's about a high school, I think in South Carolina. I think it was Charleston. I'm not sure. And they were. It was when blacks and whites were beginning to be bussed together to go to school. Okay, integration. And so this was the first team then that would have blacks and whites playing together. And there was a black guy that was going to be the head coach, and the white guy who had been the head coach at the high school was now the assistant coach. Okay, so there's a lot of storylines here. True story, by the way. And they all made it work. They somehow all made it work, and they were having this great season. They were undefeated. And then the white coach is at this football banquet, and these two guys come alongside him and says, "Boy, you're having a good season." He says, "Yeah, we might go undefeated, blah, blah, blah." And he says, "Well, we're going to take care of that. We can't have this team going undefeated." And he says, "I'll tell you what, and by the way, you're up to be in the Coaches Hall of Fame in this state. So just play ball with us, and everything will go well with you." Well, the fix was in. That next game, they had paid off the referees who were making all these horrible calls, making sure the other team would not only just win, but they would actually be able to run up the score in a sense. You could see that in the white coach's head, he didn't know what to do for a second because he really wanted to be in the Coaches Hall of Fame. But finally, he looked at these kids that he had coached, that he had sweat with, that he had bled with, and he called time out. And he walked to the middle of the field, and he said to the referees, he said, "I'm telling you, I know what it's all about, and you call this game fair, or I'll go to the newspapers. Even if I go to jail with you, you call this game fair." And then he went to his defensive group, and he said, "I don't want anybody getting past the line of scrimmage. I want them to rue the day that they played us, that they remember the Titans," right? Well, the referee started calling the game affair, and the Titans were way ahead. And about the time you start putting your lesser players in, right? But this assistant coach, this white coach, yells to the head coach, "Herman, run up the score. I don't want there to be any doubt. Leave no doubt." Why was he saying that? Because he was standing for what he believed was truth. And he didn't want there to be any doubt where he stood. That's what Jesus is doing with all these miracles. He's leaving no doubt. Okay? There was in John 6, at the end of this text then, with the turn of the water into wine, this the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. That was the outcome. He showed by the miracles that he was the truth, and they put their faith in him. In John 6, go ahead to the next one for me. In John 6, Jesus is talking to the crowds, and he's making a statement like this. He's saying, "I and the Father are one." He's claiming to be the truth. That is, the one who is not simply a man, but is true God in human flesh. And the people know it, and they're starting to pick up stones to kill him. And he said, "Why do you want to kill me?" He says, "Because you are claiming to be God." See, you're claiming to be the truth, the one. And this is what Jesus answered him. "Even though you do not believe me," read the next 3 words with me. Believe the miracles. Believe the miracles, see. These witness to me. Believe the miracles. That's why he did the miracles. That's why he turned water into wine. Now, you might say to me, "Pastor, that's all great. And yeah, I know that's a witness to us that he did these miracles, but we weren't there to see the water into wine, right? And we weren't there to see the guy that was blind from birth see again. And we weren't there to see the guy that couldn't walk from birth walk again. And we weren't there to see Lazarus when he rose from the dead. We weren't there. So how does this help us as we want to know truth? And we know the claims of Jesus. We know that he claims to be the truth. But how does this affect us? One day, go ahead. One day Jesus was talking, and scribes and Pharisees came to him, and they said, "Hey, we want you to do one more miracle for us so that we know you're the truth, you're the one." And Jesus, as he did often, he basically wouldn't jump through anybody's hoops, right? And so he says, "No, you're a sinful generation that always seeks after another sign. The only sign that'll be given," he said, "is the sign of Jonah." You remember what that was? Jonah in the Old Testament was a prophet that was running away from God's will, and so he ended up in the ocean and from a ship, and a big fish ate him, and he was in the fish 3 days, and then he got coughed up on land. So he was, in a sense, he was dead to the world for 3 days in this fish. And he says, that's the sign that you'll be given. The Son of Man, Jesus, will be in the bowels of the earth for 3 days. The sign of the resurrection. That's the sign we live in. That's the sign that all the other signs pointed to. That Jesus Christ suffered and died for the forgiveness of our sins, and 3 days later rose from the dead. Who moved that stone away anyway? The women couldn't do it. It was much too heavy. Oh, and how did they get through those crack occupation Roman forces that were guarding the tomb? I don't think any rabble could scare them away. And just what turned those disciples from being a bunch of cowards running away from Jesus to willingly live very hard lives and die horrible deaths proclaiming that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead? And by the way, they actually knew whether he had or not, right? This is our sign. Around Easter time, we give away a little book that talks about the evidences for the resurrection. It's really cool. It reminds me of that Y2K class I taught a long time ago, right? You line it all up, and it's, hey, leave no doubt, right? Leave no doubt. Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That's our sign that he is who he said he is, and his words are true. Jesus told a story, and they're fictitious figures. It's a different Lazarus than the one he raised from the dead, but he told the story of a guy named Lazarus who was very, very poor, but he walked with God, and a rich man who was just that, very rich, and he lived for himself, and he didn't have a living faith in God. So Lazarus died and went to heaven because he had faith in the true God, and the rich man died and went to hell. And in hell, the rich man calls out to God to just dip his little finger in some water and to help him because he's in agony. And God says to him, the time of grace is over. I came to you again and again, you wouldn't receive that. And he says, well, then my brothers need to be warned. And God said, well, they have the scriptures. And he says, no, that's enough. Send Lazarus back to him from the dead, and then they'll believe. And Jesus said, no. If they don't believe the witness of the Scriptures and the Spirit of God that comes through those Scriptures, they won't believe even if one comes back from the dead. In a sense, they're going to be the flat earth people. Right? They're going to be the people that say, no, we never walked on the moon. I mean, the tomb's empty, we have all the evidence, but we're not going to believe that. See, Jesus did come back from the dead, but many still didn't believe in him. Even though all the evidence is there. But for us, right now, God's Spirit is witnessing to our hearts that Jesus is the truth. That the story that he lays out for us is a story of truth. That his story that so well explains our existence, that things are broken and that we can't fix them, so he comes to us, is the true story. Right now, as his Spirit touches our hearts and says, yes, you can live in this truth, and every single day this truth can set you free. It's a story that screams at us that there's no doubt left because the tomb is always empty. You know anyone else whose tomb is empty? Jesus Christ is the one. He is the truth. And if today we're sitting here and we're rejoicing in that, then there's just this one more question. Who do you know that needs this truth in their lives? Might be your children. Might be your spouse. Might be the folks across the street. Who are the ones that need to know this truth? That's who God sends us to. That's whom God puts us in front of. For we become truth bearers to those who need to know it. Amen. Now may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in true faith to life never ending. Amen.